Welcome to this Faith for Today program entitled Not Surviving but Thriving During COVID-19. This has been a most challenging time for our church, but God has been good and our church is experiencing positive happenings since March. During this program, you will hear from several staff and laity about some wonderful events that have occurred since our building was closed in March. I researched our church's 50th anniversary booklet and found almost no information about how our church coped with the terrible flu epidemic that swept through the nation and Pittsburgh in 1918. Our church was quite small back then, and the only building was Center Chapel. It was reported that the pastor's adult son passed away that year, and the official board wrote a letter of condolences to him. It didn't list the cause of death, but that was the only mention of the year 1918 in the church's history. So with that lack of information available to us, I thought it would be a good idea to record for posterity what our church life was like during the 2020 pandemic. I asked Barbara Watson to write a narrative on this subject, and she is in the process of doing so. So Barbara, at this time, would you please share your thoughts about this ongoing project that you have undertaken?
Well, first, I probably was a little hesitant when you asked me, but once I got into the writing of the history, it made me think that this was really important to leave this sort of legacy behind to future generations, how 2020 was a very bad year, but not for MLUMC. It was a year that the church, in a way, thrived because we continue to reach out to people. And I have in the narrative the stories of the different classes. The only one that I don't recall having written anything about is the education. Kim, I don't think I have anything, so I would like to have that. But I mentioned also that how important it would have been to be able to look back and see how the church managed in 1918. But I'm sure we have all looked online and looked to see if there are any sort of comparisons, and of course there are. So I've enjoyed putting it together, and again, thank you, Joan, for asking me to do this, and I will keep adding.
Thank you. And Barbara, when it's finished, I'm sure we can prepare it in some kind of a booklet form or a report so that it would be available to all the members who are interested in reading about this. So yes. Thank you very much. Well, this has certainly been a most interesting time for our pastor. So at this time, he will offer his thoughts and experiences that have transpired since March. It has been a difficult task to carry on the church's mission while the building was closed. But Pastor Tom has a lot of information to share with us. So thank you, Pastor.
Thank you. Well, if you had called me on January the 1st and told me that this would be a year in which the church would not gather for in-person worship on Easter Sunday or on any of the Sundays through a full quarter of the church year, a quarter and counting, I would have said you're crazy. What did you have to drink on your Christmas Eve or your New Year's Eve revelries? That would have sounded impossible to me because, of course, in my whole ministry up to this point, never, unless I was ill or on vacation, I was in church leading services. So this really has been a notable year in that regard. I take you back to those early days in January. We began to hear news stories about this virus, this new virus, a novel coronavirus, they called it, that began to pop up in China and then in other places around the world. And you could see as people traveled and got on airplanes that the virus would move to different countries. Moving through January and on into February, we heard that this was happening. Then I started to hear some rumblings within the church of what an impact this could have even upon our ministry. And of course, from the standpoint of my previous experience, I thought to myself, oh, you've got to be joking. Nothing will keep us from, the church always gathers on Sunday morning. Nothing will stop that. Well, as you well know, by the time the month of March rolled around, the earliest churches in our area were actually closed for in-person worship on Sunday, March the 8th. There were a few in our area that were closed on that day. We actually moved ahead 1 week on March the 15th. We came for in-person worship, and I remember driving to church on that day and seeing the white signs on different doors of different other churches that I saw. And all that weekend of the 15th of March, we had been informed that the governor's office had gotten involved, that there was going to be this state of emergency that was going to be declared, and that stay-at-home orders were going to go in place the very next day, March the 16th. And so it was really the events of that weekend that made it clear in my mind that all of a sudden our life was going to change and pretty dramatically. And so through email, we consulted with others of the church leaders and decided that although we were meeting on the 15th, that we probably should stand down our meetings, since there were going to be these stay-at-home orders that were going to go into place. It seemed to us, although, throughout this, our governmental leaders had made it very clear that religious institutions are technically exempt from these orders because of the separation of church and state. It just seemed to make sense to us, and it certainly made sense to our denominational leaders, that we as a church really ought to serve as an example for those of our congregants and those of our community members. And it just seemed to make the most sense. Here we had this virus that they said could be easily spread in congregate settings, particularly when people were near one another for more than 15 minutes. And I heard that and I thought, that's the definition of a church service, a congregate setting where people are near one another for more than 15 minutes. It seemed to me like this could be a breeding ground for the spreading of this virus, and particularly when we started to hear some of the medical personnel say that it was possible to have this virus and to spread it without feeling any of the symptoms yourself. That really got my notice, because, it's one thing if you get one of these diseases where, you get the symptoms, and when you feel the symptoms, you stay home. But I began to think to myself, my goodness, what if I were ill and didn't even know it, and came into contact, shaking people's hands, talking to people on Sunday morning? This could be very dangerous indeed. So we closed down. We announced in church on the 15th of March that we were going to close. We remember back in those days, we said initially for 2 weeks, because the president had said, 14 days to stop the spread. And so they were encouraging people to close down for 2 weeks, and businesses and everything to shut down for 2 weeks. So that was our initial thought. And of course, then as that time went on, then an additional 30 days was tacked on to that, and then more time after that. So the church really remained closed in terms of in-person meetings in our church building throughout that entire time, all the way from, well, when we left worship on the 15th of March, all the way through till the 15th of June, which is when we took some initial steps to reopen the church office. And then we had a couple of weeks of in-person worship with reduced crowds and with many mitigating measures taking place, the wearing of face coverings and so forth. And then after the end of June, began to receive word that Pittsburgh, it seemed, was having a spike in these cases. So we stopped our in-person gatherings again until the last part of July, when we started up our outdoor worship. And our outdoor worship really has worked quite well. In the memory of everybody here on this call, this is the first time that anybody can remember using our church parking lot as a worship space. And so that's what we've done. We've had the Wesley Hall patio as our platform, and the musicians have been on there and the speakers have been on there with the congregation seated out on the parking lot. So that's worked well, and we'll continue that for a couple of weeks more, and then make our attempt to move for indoor worship once again, since we're soon going to be at the end of the season when the outdoor worship is really going to be possible in this climate in which we find ourselves. So we have tried throughout it all to keep worship going, particularly online. Remember all those weeks when we couldn't come together in person and there was no opportunity for outdoor worship or indoor worship? We began to put worship offerings online. And so it's been neat to see the way that has worked out. It's been a little bit of an adjustment for me. I never in my life felt the call to be a television evangelist or anything like that, but I've had to practice up on that. It's a different experience entirely when you're preaching your sermon by looking in a camera lens, and you're the only person in the sanctuary and you're preaching to the camera lens. So it's a totally different experience, but I've been gratified by the way in which people have responded to it. You know, we've gotten word from people that we don't even know. From part of the advantage of putting stuff online is that people can listen to it anywhere or watch it from anywhere. I've heard from high school classmates that I had long forgotten about, who somehow, through Facebook, found their way to our worship offerings, and they've worshiped with us in other places around the country and around the world. I received emails all the time from people who tell me, "Oh, Pastor, thank you for your podcast. I use it on my phone with my headphones while I'm out doing my evening walk. I listen to your podcast while I walk." So that has opened up some other opportunities, I think, for us to reach some people that perhaps we would not have reached otherwise through our worship offerings. The one great regret that I have about this time is that, we've not yet been able to say a proper farewell and thank you to Dr. Gretchen Franz, who for 39 years was our very faithful director of music in the church. You all know that in normal times, there would have been a big packed service of worship, and there will be one day, once we can do it again, there will yet be, but we were not able to have it before she technically retired. And also a great dinner, with many wonderful speeches about what she was able to do in those 39 years in our midst. So that was a great difficulty. We look forward to rectifying that situation once things return to normal and Gretchen can return and we can have that experience with her. But I did miss it. I told her I feel like your ministry of music ought to go out with a great crescendo instead of this great decrescendo. I mean, she didn't have a last Easter. She went, from playing every week to nothing, with the exception of some wonderful pieces which she and our musicians have done that we put on the video cast, and we were glad to have that. And then we've got Mitchell Stecker here. I've told him we would want to be able to welcome you with a grand service and have people have the opportunity to meet you personally and to welcome you with a great hug of fellowship. And instead, we're all dressed in disguise in our masks, and we have to stay 6 feet away from one another. But so those have been some challenges, but God continues to be faithful, and I know that God will see us through. And one day, as I tell all of the staff, we'll tell our children, well, our children already know, we'll tell our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren about this one day of what we went through back in 2020 and how God helped to see us through this unusual year when the church was unable to meet in quite the way that it was used to. Maybe, I've often thought, maybe this year was God's intentional design to maybe take our focus off of the weekly meeting, the church service, and put it onto mission service, which is what some of the rest of these people are going to talk to you about. That, I think, is a very exciting thing that I've seen during this time. The less focus on the weekly meeting, more focus on impacting people's lives through mission.
Thank you very much, Pastor Tom. And we're now going to move on to some of our programming. And Kim Roten is going to talk to us about the children's program that was quite a challenge for her to continue meeting the needs of our children during this time. So, Kim?
Hi. Thanks, John. Like Tom said, when we first shut down in March, we thought, a couple of weeks, and then we'll kind of cautiously ramp back up. And as it became more and more obvious that was not going to happen anytime soon, we had to find new ways to reach our families. And so one thing that I've been doing is consistently checking in with what I call my key players, Sunday school teachers and parents. And there's some overlap there with people who are parents and Sunday school teachers, which is always helpful too. And they've been really great about giving me feedback and ideas about what would be helpful in their families and in their homes at different points throughout this entire thing since March, because it has changed. Initially when we were 100% at home, and then as things have evolved through the summer, and then now looking forward into going into a school year, although it will look like a different kind of school year than we typically have. And I've also been in contact with, I'll just mention quickly, our nursery workers who miss our babies, as I do. I always say the best part of my job is getting to rock babies and sit on the floor with 3- and 4-year-olds and sing songs and read stories. And of course, that's exactly what we're not doing right now. So our nursery workers are anxious to get back, and we're anxious to have them back. So our Sunday school teachers and nursery people all say, as I do, that we miss you. So just want to say that first. So the biggest piece that I started with was Sunday school planning. So of course we did not want to have kids coming in to the building, even if families were willing, which probably they wouldn't have anyway. We didn't want to have kids coming in and congregating, because we know that, 4-year-olds are not really great about keeping 6 feet apart and keeping masks on, and and this was all very new back in March and April. So what I began doing is I just took the curriculum that we had as Sunday school teachers for the preschool age, and this would go through 5th graders. So what I've done is I've taken those leader guides and the supplemental materials that go with them, and I have sent that out to our families. Some of what is in the curriculum doesn't work in a family setting when you've got 1 or 2 or 3 kids versus a whole classroom full of kids. So what I've done is I've taken the way that the curriculum is written, and in many cases I have tweaked it or rewritten it to make it fit the situation that we currently find ourselves in. So you're probably dealing with 1 or 2 adults with just a couple of children, and especially in those early months, you're dealing with people who can't get out and get special materials. I still try and not send out things that would require you to have to run out to the store to buy things, because people are busy and they want to be able to just take from what's at home. So we've tried to be creative with that. Then in addition to whatever is in our curriculum, I've then added to. I've either found resources online. Very often I can find videos of cartoons that depict the Bible story for the week. I can find music videos that align with the story or the lesson, or I have just created activities. And so what I've tried to do is send out a variety each week. And then one thing, of course, that we always do during the summer is Vacation Bible School. And I was really hesitant to 100% say, we're not doing in-person Bible school. And thank goodness for Tom, because he eventually said, yeah, no, we're not doing that. It's just not going to work. Because I really was trying to find a way in my head to make it work, even though I knew that it probably wouldn't. So it was nice to have that leadership just say, no, not doing it. So we had, of course, had already purchased a curriculum, because we do that generally at the beginning of the year in January, February. And so that curriculum was not going to work unless I completely created something from it. And basically I was either going to have to do Zoom videos with a bunch of kids each day, which does not sound appealing because, it's hard, as any teacher will tell you. Or I was going to have to create a bunch of pre-made videos. Also didn't sound appealing because I was still in the process of trying to figure out that whole thing. So we ended up purchasing another curriculum that was already 100% virtual. And I assumed that I would just add some content to it. When we got it, I found out that there was actually a lot more content than I thought. And it was so much that most of our families that signed up for VBS didn't even use everything because there was so much. So they were able to pick and choose the things that worked for them. It was very science and technology based. There was a lot of STEM activities. There was a hands-on STEM activity for each day. There was music, great content. And the people who signed up for it, we had about 20 kids. So fewer than normal, but still decent considering. The kids who signed up for it are going to be able to access that content for a full calendar year. So that's one really neat thing. And if anybody wants that content that's not already signed up, I can give them access and they will have access for a full year. So that's pretty cool. So that's kind of been the state of what's been going on. In some ways it feels like I've not done a whole lot, but I've kind of dove deep into what I have been doing, and I've learned a lot, and it's been a journey. So we're just going to trek on for the fall and see what else we can learn and how to do.
Thanks, Kim, very much for that
Thank
report. You. Our next speaker is Medalise Ziegler, and Medalise has a wonderful story to share with us regarding weekday ministries and how it has thrived during this crisis. So, Metalise, would you tell us your story?
Well, it's a pleasure to be on this little program. When we closed in March, everything was decorated in shamrocks, and we were getting ready for those things that you do with children, the leprechauns and the St. Patrick's Day hoo-ha, and we had no idea that we would be closing for months. But our mission is to provide really quality early childhood education in an atmosphere of faith, hope, and love. So even though we weren't able to meet for a while, we had to find ways to stay connected with the families, and we had to stay funded, because as the old saying goes, no money, no mission. So we were able to keep the families engaged at some level. They ended up paying for the rest of the month so that the teachers could get paid, which was very gracious of them. We had a family that donated $9,000 to that purpose. We've also had 2 grants from the government. One was 13,000 something and the other was $9,000. And that money has been sitting there in an account. We haven't needed to dip into it because although we haven't been getting the revenue that we normally have per month, we've had fewer staff and we've had fewer kids since we opened on June 1st. But we were able to open June 1st. Remarkably, the children have been wearing masks. It's pretty humbling, actually, to see how they see the adults wearing them, and these 3- and 4-year-olds wear these little masks all day, unless they're eating or playing outside. They're troopers. And we started a private Facebook page so that families could stay engaged. We've actually improved our communication through email. My communication was always kind of spotty, but I've improved that. And things have been going extremely well. If you look at statistics, there really aren't very many cases of COVID in daycare. Young children don't seem to pass it very readily. And as long as adults are doing their part, wearing their masks, washing hands, doing extra sanitizing throughout the day, we have a pretty clean and healthy environment. We don't focus on COVID at the center. We focus on doing what we're meant to do, which is spending time with the children, teaching them, giving their parents peace of mind. A lot of parents have been reluctant to come back, but as soon as they do and they see how much their children appreciate being in a wholesome environment, they're very thankful that we're there. Many of our parents are still working from home, but it's very hard for them to work an 8-hour day with children underfoot who need them and who are constantly wondering why their parents aren't more available to them. So it's been wonderful. I went to Erie for the very first time ever. I've lived in the Pittsburgh area for, I don't know, almost 25 years. Had never been to Presque Isle. Last weekend, Kurt and I went to the beach. It reminded me a lot of Long Island Sound, where I used to go as a kid. And we passed a church on the way. The church had a sign that I love. It said, "Feed your faith and your fears will starve." Feed your faith and your fears will starve. And I thought, boy, that's not Holy Scripture, but boy, that's pretty darn close, because that is the truth. So we continue to focus on our faith. We continue to rely upon the Lord to provide what we need, and He has. Not all of our staff have come back, but He's providing new staff. And although our budget in June was like a third of what it normally is, we had enough money to cover our expenses. In July, we actually made a little bit of money. That was remarkable. So God has provided what we need. And with this additional money we have sitting there, I had suggested that we improve the church's Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi has been kind of lacking in the building. We have the money, we have someone who will do it, and that ought to help not only our endeavors, but it should help the church's ability to stream and ability to tune into whatever they need to. With some of that government money, we might as well use it, because our taxes are going to pay for that. So we should use it. But it has been a blessing. It has really been a blessing. And it's been different. And as I said, parents feel confident that their children are in a good, wholesome place where we're taking care of their needs, where we're providing joyful learning experiences, and no one's saying that we're never going to have a case of COVID and we're never going to have to shut down for a couple of days, or that no one will ever get sick. But we are very confident that we're handling whatever comes our way.
Matt, thank you. And one of the important points for our congregation is the care of our employees, and that our church employees were all employed during this time. Nobody had to be laid off. However, in the daycare center, we did have to do some layoffs during April, May. But briefly, would you just explain to the listeners how we took care of the employees to make sure that they were financially secured during this time?
Well, they were paid for the latter half of March, although they did not work those 2 weeks. And then after that, they were laid off. But because of the way that the unemployment compensation was provided through the government sources, and also that extra money that people were getting, they did fine. They did just fine. Now we started to we brought back key people in June. We only had 6 employees that came back in June, but the rest of them were still on their unemployment. They were fine. We brought back a couple more in July, and we've brought back more in August. And now, as I said, we're at the point where we actually need to hire a couple of people to cover the children, because we have some that are not going to come back.
But I know that you personally talked to each employee during that shutdown to make sure that
Yes.
Financially they were okay, because
I did.
If they were not, that's when the pastor's discretionary fund was going to come in.
Yes, yes.
And we were
Yes.
fortunate that nobody was in that severe of a situation.
No one, I didn't have one person who had a difficult time. We had an attorney, one of our parent attorneys actually offered to help with unemployment claims if we needed. And there were a couple of people who were helped by that too. No, nobody was severely impacted. And then there's some other things that I won't tell you, but I made sure they were okay. So they're good. They're good.
Well, thank you so much for that report, Matt. Yep. So now we move to Jim Lombardi, who will talk to us about the youth program and all the activities that they continued to do during this time. Jim?
Yes, thank you. If you think back to March, much like everybody else, we were in the middle of doing what we regularly do, and that found us in the center of planning for our summer mission trip. And if you think back to when things were beginning to shut down, actually on March 10th was a day that the youth hosted a terrific Tuesday meal for the church, and that was one of the last events that were at the church. So there are pictures of a lot of our activities and events on the church Facebook page and also the youth Instagram page. So you'll see us making the hot dogs and serving to the church family, though it was starting to get a little bit lower then, with attendance. And then we had one more Sunday worship, and then we weren't there anymore. But we had, again, our hot dogs served, and we also had ice cream sandwiches, which is significant for our summer mission trip. That's something that was served to the kids last year there, and something also called strawberry punch bowl, which if you've never had that, you have to look it up and find out what it is. It's really good. So what the youth were able to do after we sort of shut down our regular opportunities that we had, we did meet via Zoom almost weekly through the end of March, April, and a little bit into May. But the kids, the youth, middle school, high school, they were doing that really for their school. So they weren't super excited about doing it that much more. And we're going to see what that brings for the fall again. Some kids are in school. Some kids are doing a mixture of what they're doing. Some kids are totally online. So I'm trying to be cognizant of that too, and not overexpose them to that, because we have a meeting just like this, and it's just like a classroom where you're trying to get kids to have fun and do different things, but sometimes they just want to sit there and stare at you and not want to get involved. So we tried to figure out, much like him was saying, what is our path forward? What is a new way to do this? So we did some online devotionals using the YouVersion Bible app. The kids could have this on their phone, and it's a devotional. You could see, read certain things on a daily basis, watch some videos, and insert your comments on it. And then everybody had it shared, and they were able to read what other people read there. And the parents and families sometimes got involved in that too. So that was kind of cool. We did a couple of those through the early weeks of all this happening. And then one other online thing we did was a Jeopardy challenge. So I sent out a board to the kids where they had different categories and different, I won't say monetary, but different point values to what they would do. And they had to help their neighbor. They had to, at that point, getting outside and doing something, because it was in May, I think it was, like maybe they haven't really been outside much a lot. They were making something from scratch. They were doing something for a neighbor, working for somebody else. All these added together, and they got their points and filled out their board. So that was a fun, interactive activity that we did back in May. We also had some service opportunities where we were able to help out in the yard of a congregation member and get out there and clean up from the winter. Again, we're ending the summer. It's hard to remember back then, but we were back in May cleaning up from the winter, and we had youth and families join together to do that. We also had a group of youth come to the church and help plant all of the flowers that are still there on the church grounds. So the helping the family was on May 16th, and helping at the church was on May 23rd. Again, it was just good to see the kids, to get out for a few times in person. We were wearing our masks, we were staying apart, but we were still in the same place, and that just felt really good. So with that, and thinking about how things were actually somewhat better in June than maybe they are now or were in July, the youth got together for a kickball game in the church parking lot on June 14th. So again, just wonderful to see everybody together. That was a game where, we could obviously stay apart for the most part and just be outside, have fun. And we had our masks on again, but home run, we were down in the lower parking lot. Home runs, were kicking it over the wall up toward Wesley entrance, and we ran around in the circle there and had bases drawn on with chalk on the ground, and it was just a blast. I mean, it really doesn't take much to get people excited at this point, but it was a wonderful thing to be outdoors, playing with other people and having fun. So we also got the church, or the youth, together at the church on August 1st to do some projects. We painted the doors around where the dumpster is, and that entrance in there, and then also we painted the ceiling to the main office entrance area. Just again, some opportunities, some ways to serve. We missed out on our mission trip, being able to do that. So we were looking for some ideas and some activities to do with the youth over the summer. And we did a lot of fundraising over the past year for this mission trip, which of course we're saving some of that for future endeavors that we're hopefully going to have. But we were able to also send a donation to Crossroads Ministries down in Marion, Virginia, which is where we typically go for our mission trip. And so we were able to reach out to them in that way. They had back in April, I think it was, there were some tornadoes that went through Tennessee, Virginia area, down in that area, and they needed some help with flood buckets and other things for the summer coming up with storm season, if you will. And we may be getting into that with the big storms coming up now. So we had a lot of different ways to get together and to find ways to connect online. And we're looking at the fall. Again, a lot of our kids are experiencing this in different ways. Some kids went away on vacation this summer. Some kids haven't really seen their friends at all. Some kids are loving it because they don't like to get together with a lot of people that much. So we're trying to be, just paying attention to all that. What do some of the kids need? And looking at that for the fall, and what their situation is going to be with their school, with their family, and all of those aspects, and try to cater to that. So we are going to look into that. We had just few opportunities to meet and to have some discussions. As these kids are in middle school and high school, they are seeing what is happening around the world and in our country. So we have had the opportunity to, and we're certainly looking forward to having some pretty deep discussions about what do you think about what is happening in the world around you, and how does being a Christian relate to that? And and it's just awesome to talk to kids about that and what they see. And sometimes you don't even think of what they're telling you, and it just makes you feel like a much better person being around them and knowing that. So we are going to continue that, because obviously these discussions, both in our city and in our country and around the world, are going to continue to happen. And we want to sort of refocus on what does it mean to be a Christian, a United Methodist, and a member of Mount Lebanon United Methodist Church. So as I said, we're going to have opportunities to meet together, I think, in the fall. We're going to try a couple things outside. Not sure how often yet, but and maybe taking advantage of some of our larger spaces like Asbury Hall, etc. Maybe once the weather is not so agreeable. So that's what we've been doing, and hopefully we're looking forward to a lot of things, but it's not going to be same as usual moving forward.
Thank you, Jim, for that report. At this time, Pastor Tom will offer a prayer.
O Lord our God, we thank you for your presence in our midst, particularly during this very unique and challenging year. How oftentimes we read in your word circumstances where times of difficulty and times of challenge became times of great fruit bearing and great growth, all because of your work through the lives of your people through difficult days. Our times have been no different. We have found in the midst of challenge, new growth has come. In the midst of even times of suffering and difficulty, we have found evidence of new life and the ability to overcome. So continue to work through the ministry of our church so that we will continue to work through and through to that day when final victory over this COVID-19 virus will be achieved. And until then, we pray for all of those who are working against it on our behalf. In the name of Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen.
Thank you very much